You're a good podcast listener. That's why I'm inviting you to kick off your shoes and head on over to the founder's bed and make yourself comfortable because we are going to have quite the chat. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, wow, do I have an episode for you today, one that I've been wanting to do for so long. Yes, it is Severance. And yes, we are with Dan Erickson, the creator and co-writer of Severance. As you hopefully know, Severance has been nominated for 14 Emmys after its first season, and one of which is, of course, Outstanding Dramatic Series and also writing, amongst many other great Emmy nominations that it so rightly deserves. I just wanted to call out those two. And it was really fun to have Dan in for a chat because it was just great to be able to walk back through previous episodes now that there's no longer real spoilers from the first season. Of course, there's spoilers of things that are unanswered that Dan can't talk about. And, you know, I didn't waste time with much of that. But really, we were able to get in some very interesting definitions and take a look at how Dan went on this very long journey to change his pilot script and really continue to refine it through collaboration until it became the show that we know. If you've never seen the show, as usual, we start out spoiler-free, really just talking about the concept, right? If this were a movie, we'd be talking about things that we know from the trailer, the concept. But yeah, when we get into spoilers, and we really couldn't talk spoiler-free beyond 15 minutes because there's just too much ground to cover. I think it should also be noted that what's so interesting about season 1 and this interview with Dan is this is Dan's first produced credit. That's right, running a writer's room. Dan had never even been in a writer's room before, but he adapted so quickly because he had a fantastically creative team around him. And Dan was without a doubt very forthcoming about his creative process and collaborating and what it took to get season 1 of Severance made. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, Backstory Magazine turns 10. That's right. We survived a decade and we couldn't have done it without your help. And the other good news is that we just released a new issue. Yes, issue 47, our summer issue is live and there is so much great stuff in it. I hope you check out the table contents to see it all, but we have Emmy Awards contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Better Call Saul, Station 11, Barry, Hacks, and What We Do in the Shadows, to summer movies, to new scripts for you to read, to an interview with director John Carpenter on the 40th anniversary of The Thing. Man, there are so many great things in this issue, and I hope you check it out. If you have never read us before, you can, of course, test drive us over at backstory.net and read the free issue, or you could use the iPad app Backstory, where you could read the free issue there as well. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could consider becoming a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I want to give you discount coupon code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. The code will work at backstory.net, and you enter it there in your checkout cart, but it'll give you access to both backstory.net and the iPad app as well. So, you know, it's 2 for 1. You get access to both easily. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube channel, which is all these Zoomcasts go of these interviews. So you could see us do the interviews. You don't have to just hear us, but it would really mean a lot to me to have you subscribe to my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our chat with writer and creator Dan Erickson about what it took to make the first season of Severance, which is nominated in 14 different Emmy categories, including writing and best drama series. Okay, so Dan, it's great to have you. I'm a huge fan of the show. How you doing?
Thanks, Jeff. It's really good to be here. I'm great. It's fun to be on here talking about it.
You won, I believe, multiple awards at the Hollywood Critics Association the other night, including Best Streaming Series, Best Drama, most importantly, Best Writing. You are Emmy nominated for Best Writing and Best Series. Congrats on all the kudos. We're going to start in a non-spoiler fashion and get into some of the spoilers to get behind some of the great moments of the first season. But I really want to give people a baseline for you. Where are you from and where'd you go to school? I know you went to NYU.
So I did go to NYU. I'm originally from Olympia, Washington, which, you know, is right up there, about an hour south of Seattle. Great town. From there, I actually came, first time I moved to LA was 2002 for college. I was down here at a school for 2 years and then transferred back, and I bounced around a lot. Ultimately ended up in New York for grad school, and then came here to LA about 10 years ago.
One of the most traumatic things that could happen to a film school student is graduating, getting out into the real world.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I know
tell me about that part.
Yeah, I know that led to your story, though. And I know you've said this multiple times. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but just give folks, a clue as to how the idea for Severance began by you bouncing around at various jobs, kind of wishing you could clock out in your mind.
Yeah. Well, and I always am conflicted telling this story because it's a good story and it's my story and I like it. But, it involves admitting how miserable I was at a job and the person who hired me for that job, I've never reconnected with. I don't know if they know any of this, like, right. That my misery there, is what led to this show.
It was a door factory here in LA.
It was a door factory. And I want to say it was run by very nice people. There was, and I was happy at the time to have the job. But yeah, I had just moved to LA and I literally just had to get the first Craigslist job I could find. And, this is back when economic times were hard, not like now when they're perfect. But it was, it really was like I had applied for, or I called in for like 50 jobs. And this is the only one I heard back on. It was a factory / business that, would make and ship and attach and repair doors and gates. But I just say door factory because that sounds more, sure. Weird and Monsters Inc. Yeah. I was there and I was going into work one morning and it was just literally had this idea of like, what if there was some way where you could be at the desk doing your job, but you didn't have to be, you didn't have to associate with that time. You could pull away and not experience it and just feel like you had skipped the workday. And it was just like, that's a kind of horrifying thing to catch yourself wanting. And so it was all just born out of that.
Did you try and get any entertainment industry jobs? Was this a result of you not being able to get one of those types of jobs? Yeah,
well, and I eventually did. I did eventually work, a couple of low-level entertainment industry jobs. But this was like when I had first, it really was like first couple weeks in LA, and I had to sort of get what I could get.
Sure.
And yeah, it's where it turns out a master's degree does not guarantee you any job.
Yeah.
Let alone one in the industry. So yeah.
What were some of the entertainment industry jobs that you held?
I worked at a place called Super Deluxe that I don't believe exists anymore, at least in the form it did then. I started as an assistant there, and then I did some like development stuff which was interesting. It was cool to get a little experience on that side of that particular desk, because now I work with these development people, and it's good to have a sense of sort of where their heads are coming from in these conversations.
Anywhere else other than Super Deluxe?
Not really. Well, I did. I was one of those guys. I don't know if they do this anymore. I would hand out passes for upcoming like screenings. Yeah. And I would accost people outside of movie theaters mostly and try to get them to take a pass. And then yeah, like I got paid per pass of people who came back. So it's like sometimes I got paid nothing. Sometimes I got paid a little. That was really the spectrum.
It's good to know because, people have a curiosity, because when we look at your IMDb, there's not much there, because your breaking in story really is Severance, which is, by the way, fantastic. So I just wanted to set that down. And the fact that you were letting your creative wheels spin when you were in a boring job, obviously, people think of stories like Chris McQuarrie. Working in a law office in the copy room, being bored, looking at all the stuff hanging on the bulletin board and coming up with the ending for Usual Suspects, and kind of having those creative wheels continue to spin, even when you're in a job that you don't like. It really is important for writers to do. So the only other thing that I've been able to gather of just kind of your path here is that eventually you did write this as a pilot. It was different, and it wound up getting on the Blood list. And what year was that?
It was like 6 years ago.
Okay. So
but I don't even remember what year it is now. Yeah, that math If that math works, then yes.
Well, so tell us about the earliest draft of your pilot, because you've said that it's very different from the show, and we're still in the non-spoiler section. We know the show. People have a gist of what it's about, and it is the pilot. So I'm allowing anything you want to tell us in there. But what would people remarkably notice as being different in the pilot? I'd read that it's Mark that wakes up on the table, for instance.
It is. It's Mark that wakes up on the table. And I think you can find the Bloodlist draft if you look. I think that's online. And that one has a lot of these differences, but even that is pretty different from where it really originated, like the very first draft. The first draft, I mean, yeah, there was a lot that was different. It was Mark that woke up on the table. The other thing that I had forgotten until recently is that he didn't just wake up on the table. The first draft, it's like you're in an empty boardroom and there's the table. And all of a sudden it was like the panels in the ceiling came apart. And this big, what I can only describe as a giant anus comes down out of the ceiling, this sort of pulsing, fleshy monstrosity. And it basically births Mark down onto the table, and he's like wriggling and naked and slimy. And then he was like, he gets up, and I think there was a version of that initial conversation where he wakes up and there's the speaker and it's saying, "Who are you?" But in that version, I believe it was Milchick asking the questions.
Okay.
And so, yeah, then he escapes and he goes, and the way that it was structured was like the first half of the episode was like his first day, leading up to the point where he, like, I think watches his video and realizes what's going on. And then the second half, we went back and it was the Audi life, but it was like leading up to how he got hired. And it was like, I think he runs over Cobell's cat for some reason, like he hits her cat and he like goes to apologize, and like, he ends up somehow getting a job out of it.
That's a revenge on him, basically.
Basically, it was a whole, not a save the cat moment, but an avenge the cat moment for Cobell.
Avenge the cat.
Yeah, which really, I guess, became then her whole motivation for the whole series.
Yeah,
but
yeah. That's really funny. Well, so it ends up on the Bloodlist, and I want to talk about later when we're in the spoiler section, which will be soon, kind of how it was developed. But that concept of birthing is really important. And was that kind of your first image of being birthed into a corporate life? Yeah,
that was sort of the idea behind it, and we kept the element of somebody like waking up, like lying down, like we made it. We ultimately changed it, and it was Helly, of course, but we still have her lying down as opposed to like waking up in a chair, or like walking through a door, because we did sort of want to give this sense of like, you're this like sort of empty vessel, this baby that's been placed down in this place. And the idea that the first thing she hears is coming from a speaker was sort of, meant to invoke this almost like being in a womb or something. It's like you are being spoken to by your parent, which is this building. So yeah, it was definitely, for all intents and purposes, these characters are being born in these moments. I mean, this is their first conscious experience, this version of them. So it's definitely part of it.
I guess my last question on that is, what made you decide to make Mark her interim manager, filling in for Petey on the first day? How did that change? And what else could you tell us about Mark in your original pilot versus where we find him?
Yeah, a lot of things changed. I mean, one thing that motivated it was wanting Mark as our sort of main protagonist to have a sense of history on both sides, where, we wanted to be able to follow him already as someone who has friends, who sort of knows the lay of the land here, and have this other character, Helly, be the one who comes in and is new and is sort of blowing everything up and questioning the formula. So yeah, it was that. And then also a desire to have Petey's, like, what happened to Petey, be a central question on both sides of the divide, where it's like Petey really is, his absence is the inciting incident on the inside. And then he shows up in Mark's life, and that's the inciting incident on the outside.
When did that get into your pilot? Like, was that once you were developing it with Stiller, or was that even the Bloodlist days?
It's hard to remember exactly what changed and when.
Okay.
I think that was before Ben got it, because I had been taking it around and talking to a couple other people and hearing some thoughts and making some changes. And so I think that by the time Ben got it, it was Helly waking up on the table.
Well, so, that just briefly, and if you can remember, if something comes to mind, this is a hard thing to pitch. everybody gets the separation of work, personal life balance. So that part goes easy. But it's a risky show, one way or another. I'm curious, what is the worst note that you got from some of the companies that you pitched it to that, wanted to change it into something it definitely wasn't, and you just had to politely smile and be like, oh no, that's an interesting idea.
I took it somewhere that was definitely interested in making it a little more red meat sci-fi. I think they were interested in maybe there being like robots or, other sort of more familiar tropes of the sci-fi genre. When I was first writing it by myself, I was looking at like Brazil, Dark City, and these other kind of really stylized.
Yeah, the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind company.
Well. But yeah, so I think that there was a little bit of a push to make it more something that could be more consumable, I guess. There was someone else I talked to about it who was really, this wasn't a bad note. It was just a different way that it could have gone, because Ben is so into, we have to know all the answers. We have to have a logic to the world. And even if it doesn't show on screen, we have to know it. We have to have answers to why you wake up on a table and what the numbers are and all this stuff. And this other person I had spoken to was much more like, it doesn't matter. Just have it be, have it be weird. Like was sort of intentionally pushing it in more of a murky direction, which just would have been a different show.
That makes sense. So we'll get back to that concept of knowing the answers in a moment. But so how were you able to get it to Red Hour? Did you have representation? And I know that you'd had companies pass on it. What's it like to keep the flame alive for something that isn't selling immediately, that you've been working on and changing for years, because it's not easy?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to have a manager, a guy named Ben Blake, who is just really, really smart, frustratingly handsome man who, swooped in and picked me up and got me a lot.
Before or after the Bloodlist?
This was before.
All right. So you were able to get a manager based on this pilot? Actually,
no, that was because of a different script I had written, a feature script. That's the one that he saw. That was called Hellywood, but it has nothing to do with Helly from Severance.
Interesting. Is there any status on what's going to happen with that?
I have recently been having a couple more conversations about it, but nothing official. But yeah, that was like a horror comedy thing. And I told him when we met, I was like, yeah, I'm working on this thing. It's a little darker. It's a little stranger. It's sort of Lynchian in a way. And he was just into it from the beginning. He was probably the first person who ever actually read it, besides me and maybe a couple of close friends. So he got me all these meetings, all these early meetings. It had to be nominated to get on the Bloodlist. I believe it had to be nominated by like somebody at one of those companies who were like, well, we're not doing it, but we think somebody should. And so they
gotcha.
Recommended, I believe is how it worked. But yeah, so that was, and then after the Bloodlist, it was seen by this producer, Jackie Cohn, who's become a really good friend of mine. And she was really into it. And she was working with Ben at Red Hour. So she sent it to him. And then, yeah, I just randomly, I was, I say this a lot, but I was literally like driving for Postmates and I like get a call from my manager and he's like, hey, Ben Stiller wants to talk to you about directing your show. And it's just like, okay, I have to finish my order. I have to finish this order, but then I'll go celebrate.
I hope you got good reviews. Look, it's the call that every writer wants. No, you did not you were a bad Postmates driver, huh?
I was the worst. They
invented the stickers on food so you couldn't open it up because of you. Is that what you're saying?
Look, I'm not a monster. I didn't do that, but I did. I drove around I had like a little scooter, like a Vespa style scooter, and I would strap the food to the back. And there was once, especially, it was like giant order. And I was already really late. It had been like an hour and I'm almost at their house. And I look back and I see that the food is just flown off and I watch it get hit by like a semi truck.
Oh, man.
And so, yeah, those poor people had to wait like 3 hours for their food.
That's terrible. They still hate you. But they probably don't realize as they watch Severance and order Postmates that you're behind it. Stiller, we're going to get into the spoilers in a second. I'm just going to ask about your habit because that's really the last non-spoiler question because there's so much to talk about. When you sit down to write, in general, features or television, how important is outlining to your process?
It's become more important for sure. I think that when I first started writing the pilot and when I would write features, which I've done too a couple times, feature scripts, I don't outline a lot. I like to sort of wing it and go through, but writing a 10 episode season of a multi-season TV show turns out is a really different animal. I think I'm a little bit of a wispy, free-flowing writer by nature, and I like to just sort of find my way through it. But I've had to get better at the other part for sure, because, you know, we're just trying to make sure that every character is being serviced over the course of however long this goes, and that we're putting them all in, developing interesting arcs for them and everything. So I've had to change a bit.
That's good to know. When you sit down to write, do you give yourself a page count to hit, or do you sit down for a certain amount of hours each day that you want to stick to?
A lot of times I say 5, and this is
5 pages or 5 hours?
5 pages.
Okay.
A lot of times I'll say 5 pages. And this is usually like when I'm not on a massive deadline. Like sometimes these days it's like, I just have to get as many as I can, or like I have to do 25 today because there's just so, you know, we're on a deadline and we got to get there. If I'm just writing on my own and I'm like trying to sort of keep a pace and make sure I'm being productive, 5 pages.
That sounds right. And what's your cure for writer's block if you get it? What do you do to push through?
There's a lot of things. I'll go take a walk. I'll shake my head out a little bit. I'll try to come at it from a really crazy place. I'll just be like, okay, well, what if I was just writing this for myself? You know, what would happen? And I'll just write down like in quick succession, like the 10 craziest, weirdest, not thought through ideas I can. And oftentimes something will come out of that. I'll literally just look around. I don't know. I have this, like, I just have a weird way of thinking where it's like sometimes I just need something to be spurred, and I'll just like look around at objects in the room, and like something will lead to something else, and suddenly there's an idea.
So you just put in the time. It's that's basically your answer.
It's a lot of patience. It's a lot of patience. That's a weird thing to say because I know not everybody has the luxury of that much patience. I mean, if you're working a different job or you're on a really tight deadline, you can't always sit there and look at things in the room, you know, but when I'm able to do that, it works and it helps.
All right. Well, so podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where these Zoomcasts go as video, press pause if you have not yet seen Severance, especially the finale, because we are we are going to dive in deep. But, you know, now that we're in the spoiler section and the warning has been issued, really, I want to hear what some of Stiller's early notes to you were, and how the script changed before you even got your writing staff and before it was greenlit at Apple. What were things that he wanted you to do so that you could bring it out with his name on it for the greenlight?
It was mostly about grounding it. I mean, it was mostly about, he felt that the concept itself was sort of weird enough that you didn't have to throw a bunch of other, you know, Terry Gilliam-esque bells and whistles at it. And, you know, the thing we always talk about, again, I think the ceiling anus was gone by the time that Ben saw it, I think. But there was a pair of like disembodied legs that ran by at one point.
Ran by the office or in the hallway?
So in this version, there was another floor that Mark like made his way up to, and it was like sort of destroyed. Like there had been a battle there or something. And by the way, none of these are spoilers, because when I wrote this, I had no idea what it was all
right
going to mean. And these are all ideas that we've scrapped. So like, you know, you're not going to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there was like this weird charred older version of the office. And he went up there, and I think I think there was someone trapped in like a closed cubicle, and they were like, it was like a ceiling on, and they couldn't get out. So it was a lot more, it was weirder and a little more like thrillery. And I think that's the version Ben saw first, but he kept asking, he was just like, okay, well, why is that woman there? You know, why is she in the cubicle? And does that make sense to the world, the story we want to tell? What is it? You know, he wouldn't let me sort of just have things be weird for the sake of weird. You know, it all had to. And at the same time, he was like, I just think that like the weirdness of this concept, but told in a slightly more grounded human way, is actually going to be way more effective. And, you know, I respected him for many years as a artist. So I was like, yeah, okay, let's try it. And it turns out he was right.
I want to focus on that for a second here, because this idea of a war-ravaged floor, was that something that later influenced the concept of, you know, O&D versus macro data refining as, you know, this potential piece of misinformation artwork battle that probably never took place? Was that something that kind of filtered its way back into the show? It may have. I think that in my head, there had actually been like a big battle. Okay. Or like an attempted resistance where everybody got killed up there. I think. But it's possible that made its way back in this like
in-universe lore that now exists on the show.
I love hearing about left turns. Is there anything else you want to tell us about something, even once the writer's room was functional, that, you know, for a week or 3 weeks, you were convinced this was going to be a part of the show? It never wound up there. So again, not a spoiler. It was an idea that you guys were really fixated on, but then you realized that you were going to scrap, just like, you know, the ceiling, you know, element and the war-torn floor that you just told us about, because it's always fun to hear about left turns.
Yeah. So there was a plot line that we all sort of liked, where I don't remember why, but, you know, Grainer, the character Grainer, who is killed in the show, the security guy who was killed by Ragabi. In the original version, he was, I think, run over by a car, by Mark's car. And then Mark hurt his tooth. Grainer's tooth got stuck in like the grill of Mark's car. Right. And there was a whole plot line about Mark not knowing what to do and having to try to get this tooth out. And then eventually, for a reason I can't remember, Mark was forced to eat the tooth. And then later he shat it out at work. And he was confused why there was a tooth in his stool. I don't know if I should have said that, but I just did. So
no, that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
That was something that was it was literally discussed in the writer's room. Like, we had like cards out for like, okay, where in Mark's digestive tract is Grainer's tooth now? There
was a Sundance movie I saw years ago that was, I think, 3 hours long and set in the Chrysler Building. The name is avoiding me now, but somebody is actually pooping out teeth in that. That's amazing. And again, with the car, just like killing the cat, you know, you and Mark's car was definitely a thing. I guess a really interesting thing to bring up right at the beginning, though, you know, as the show is steeped in lore and fans have so many questions, there's this famous story about the TV show Lost. And there was a pitch meeting, and J.J. Abrams said they're walking through the jungle. Somebody trips over something. They look down, and it's a hatch. And the other writers said, "What's in the hatch?" And he said, "I don't know, but we have to figure it out." And so that worked in the early seasons of Lost, but for some fans, there were more questions than there were answers by the end. And I'm curious how you approach that kind of issue on Severance, in which you said that Ben Stiller was really good about kicking the tires and trying to ground things. Does that mean that you know everything from, I'm sure you know the goats, but like all the other things that are brought up based on what the data miners are mining and what the numbers really mean and stuff like that? And then the lore of the Egan family, like, was that a part of your writing process to kind of journal that out so that even though it wasn't a part of the show, you understood what it meant to you and the characters?
Yes, it is part of it. And I know in my head, like, what Lumen is doing, what their ultimate goal is, what macro data refinement is, and what part that is going to ultimately play in the ultimate plan. I have some ideas of where the characters are going to go, sort of as this, you know, we move through the corporate conspiracy element of it, and layers of that get sort of pulled back. You know, I have some sense of like what role each character will play in that, but that's pretty loose. And because in terms of the characters and where they go, you know, you want to have a sense of where it's going so that you don't get totally, you know, untethered and lost, for lack of a better word.
Right.
But you also want to, it's like, I don't know, maybe in season 4, it turns out it's really fun to have Dylan go and live in, you know, in France. Like, for, I don't know why he would, but like, you want to be flexible enough and pliable enough that, you know, you're not just trying to hit plot points. You know, and you feel like you're sort of playing jazz a little bit and having fun a little bit. So it's a balance. It's a balance. It's a hard one to hit. And I will not know until it's over if I'm good at it.
Ooh, hey kids, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you that Backstory just turned 10. That's right. We've made it a decade. We're here. We've survived, and we couldn't have done it without your help. And, you know, we want to keep doing it. So your support means everything to us. And now is a perfect time to subscribe, because we just released our big summer issue. That's right. We have Emmy contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Barry, Better Call Saul, What We Do in the Shadows, Station 11, and Hacks. We also have summer movies. We have an interview with actor Glenn Powell, who plays Hangman in Top Gun Maverick. We have John Carpenter, the director of The Thing, on its 40th anniversary. Looking back, there are so many great articles to read in Backstories. Huge summer issue. There's also scripts to read. I know you'll dig it. If you've never read us before, you could, of course, test drive us by reading the free issue, which you could find at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And look, after you check us out and test drive us, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber. And just to sweeten the deal, I want to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter that code at backstory.net, and it'll get you access to both the iPad login and over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop as well. Look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of all these Zoomcasts. That's right. You could watch us do these interviews because they were Zooms that I've put on YouTube on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's get right back into our chat with Dan Erickson, the creator and co-writer of Severance Season 1, which has been nominated for 14 Emmys, including Best Writing and Best Outstanding Drama. As a first season, it was near pitch perfect because the reinforcement of character-driven storytelling versus just plot-driven storytelling really does it. You even poke fun at it, macro data refinement when they're kind of guessing at one point. Dylan says he thinks they're blowing up eels with probes so that, quote, desperate humanity could repopulate the ocean. Irving thinks that they're maybe editing curse words out of films, So it's like the only thing that we empirically know is that sometimes people feel a little weird when they're first doing it, as we see Helly experience it, because for the first part of the season, she's our fish out of water. So she's kind of trying to get things straight as to what's going on. So it was very interesting how even something like that was handled with predictably more questions and not answers, but you were self-aware enough about it that all that really matters is the characters. Was there ever going to be part of season 1's finale where you do find out more about what Lumen does? I think it was definitely the right choice that you do not, because it keeps people invested. Eventually we'll want to, just like Dharma Initiative for Lost, if you make the comparison.
Yeah. I mean, it's something, I give Ben credit / I throw him under the bus, depending on how people feel about it. But for that choice for the overtime contingency to be the last episode of the season, because my original plan had one more episode following that, and we were going to get a little more answers. We were going to see sort of what the fallout was of the OTC, and ultimately it was just like Ben came in one day and was just like, I think she's alive. I think that's the end of the season. And we talked through it, and by the end of the conversation I was convinced too, and very fortunate that he had that insight. And I think people's response to that episode specifically highlights what a correct choice that ended up being.
We'll get into that in a second, but when you say she's alive, you're talking about Gemma, obviously, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure, and we'll get to her in a second.
Specifically, Mark yelling that to Devin as he's holding up the picture and saying she's alive.
Just an amazing moment. When did the overtime contingency idea come about? Because, in your mythology that you've set up, the rules are at least that their personal life and work life is separated. The elevator is the portal through which they go between these two realms. But Milchek and Miss Coble, they are not seemingly severed, or we have not had an indication that they are, especially Miss Coble. Are there rules that you kind of invented for who works at Lumens in an unsevered capacity?
I feel okay saying that I, from my perspective, Coble and Milchek and most of the management people at least are not presenting themselves as severed. The story that at least is being told to the innies and to us, the audience, is that these are unsevered people. Of course, you never know what's actually true and what's not true at Lumen. Sure. So, they don't have chips. They're going up and down the elevator. And because the idea was always sort of that you would need somebody sort of running things, like you would need somebody with a greater awareness of the purpose of the company and the purpose of the different departments to be down there managing and running things. But yeah, in terms of the overtime contingency, that was an idea that came in pretty early on. I think before the writer's room was even brought in, I think I had a concept of it that, toward the end, the innies are going to find a way to wake themselves up. Because that just, to me, feels like, to me, it was almost a Chekhov's gun. It's like, well, you have to, at some point, you have to see what's going to happen if one of them, because they're talking about sort of escaping. And it's like, well, there's got to be some way to find out who we are. And so you have to bring it to that point, whether it's what we did through physically having them awaken upstairs or just having them somehow get that information a different way. I think that was sort of, literally the first words stated on the show are, who are you? So that is the question that each of the innies, and to an extent the outies too, are asking themselves throughout the whole season. So you had to provide a response to that.
Were they always called innies and outies?
No, that came kind of later. There's definitely like way back in my notes, a whole list of like different options. It's funny, you have some people in the world of the show who call them workies. And that's apparently, it's like, no, that's not the term. That's not what you're supposed to say.
Right.
It's innie outie. But yeah, I don't know. I loved how infantilizing it was. But the great thing is, especially like working on the set, you get to a point where it stops being weird. You're just like saying innie and outie as though it's a normal thing to say. And then you forget that it's like a belly button thing.
This season is really an example of everything kind of going right, but a lot of work put into it. But the hat trick that I'm sure you guys were most nervous about, or I would think you spent a lot of time discussing, kind of in a way like Twin Peaks season 1, there's not a clear antagonist. There's danger around every corner. We get that sense. And there's the threat of the corporate culture, which, assuming it stays consistent, is bad. We still have no idea if it's going to be a twist like season 1 of Alias, where SD6, where she's working and she thinks are the good guys or the bad guys.
Yeah.
These people that they all think are the bad guys at Lumen could really be empirically doing something to save the world, but they're being fascists, to these workers. Who knows? But it's tough to not have an exact antagonist. So you have Milchick a little, you have Kobo a little, you have the head of security, but they're still just threats. What was the challenge for you to not exactly have a clearly defined antagonist, which in itself can be scary because it's a gray area and we fear the unknown?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always going to be more compelling and more realistic, if your antagonists have human motives. Nobody decides to be bad. People can decide to be selfish or to make compromises or do things that will hurt people for what they think is the greater good. But, we see in Cobell's, when we go down to Cobell's basement, you sort of start to get the sense of how deep she is in this thing, and she is not, ostensibly severed, but that doesn't mean that her brain hasn't been messed with, or her mind or her psyche hasn't been messed with and manipulated by this. What we're finding more and more is a corporate cult. So it really is, Lumen itself is sort of the antagonist of the show. And I always think it's really interesting to look at any big corporation where there's sort of a cult of personality around a founder or a CEO. You start to see the shades of gray in between that and something like Heaven's Gate.
The Heaven's Gate cult, not the Heaven's Gate movie.
Yes. Exactly.
You leave Warren Beatty out of this.
Don't touch Warren.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. Like, Apple produces this. Steve Jobs was a genius. Apple has a great corporate culture. Steve Jobs never wrote a line of code, right? From anyone that's ever interviewed him. So it really was about creating a culture that people wanted to believe in. Here, you have a corporate culture that is a cult in a sense, almost to the point of religious fanaticism and fetishization about not only the founder's history, but the place itself, where it's built. Everything about each division has its own mythology and lore to keep them interested. Did you study cults and kind of cults themselves? I know one of your jobs, you were exposed to corporate culture and the kind of double speak and euphemisms that became a part of the show. One of your other LA jobs other than the Door Factory. But how far did you look into cults and the religiosity of a corporate culture?
Quite a bit. Yeah. And I mean, we looked at all sorts of things. We looked at I'm blank, Nexium. Was it the one that was the documentary recently? we looked a lot at that, other cults. But what's fascinating to me is this idea that people in cults don't think they're in cults. So how do you know if you're in one? The more you look at it, like I saw someone pointed out recently, like it's a little weird that we call the signers of the Declaration of Independence our fathers. Like that's a little, if you really pull back from that, like we've always accepted that, and you hear founding fathers and you don't think twice about it, but like that's a weird thing to do. And why do we do that? Why do we want to do that? Like, what is it in our psyche that makes us want to reach out for these like long dead father figures who represent like perfect wisdom somehow? It's corporations, it's cults, it's religions, it's countries. It can be any number of things, but it's like you find that there are these weird impulses that we all have that are preyed upon, or at least taken advantage of to sort of inspire loyalty. And I think once you start looking for that, you start seeing it everywhere. And that's when things get kind of scary.
Well, and that's the thing that's interesting about the show as well, because everything we know about Keir is, he's a saint, right? But if you look at the quote unquote founding fathers, there is a whole religious cult built around them, to the point that when people want to point out that, they're slaveholders, that Thomas Jefferson fathered slaves and let his children be born into slavery, those things people want to edit out very quickly. So it's the protection of this special view. I mean, I guess, you can't have the ominous lumen without some sort of resistance. And the whole concept of Ragabi on the outside, not on the inside, interestingly, or not that we've seen so far. That's interesting. And you really only have one episode dedicated to a resistance other than the idea of our, family team of workers. How far were you originally going to go down that kind of rabbit hole in season 1, which you clearly are deciding to save for later? But I mean, there's great, setups to it. You see people handing out flyers, that Petey's experience is terrible and they need to be stopped. So it's not like we're confused by it, but it's interesting to see that there's an outie version to the resistance as well.
Yeah, totally. There's definitely, we wanted to hint at sort of a greater network on the outside. And I think that's one of the most interesting differences about, the inside versus the outside is on the outside, there is a pre-existing network of people who have been, it's like, we've been discussing this as a culture. We've been talking about the ethics of it. There are groups like the Whole Mind Collective, which are these well-intentioned but maybe not terribly effective, maybe sort of the performative version of resistance against this. And then you have this hint with Ragabi that she's maybe part of something a little bit more subversive and maybe a little bit more radical, and that she's really trying to sort of in secret take steps to end this. And it's like, there's to some degree, it's just on its face that the ethics of Severance, it's people saying that they don't think it's right to do this and that it shouldn't be allowed. But then there is also, it of course begs the question of what else Lumen is doing and what are they hiding? What are they using Severance to obfuscate? But I think it's interesting that on the outside there's that, and on the inside there's not. It's just one of the interesting dynamic shifts is like in there is no culture. There is, but it's much smaller, and it's basically for people being told what to do. And they have to invent the revolution down there, and they get a little help from the words of the good Dr. Rick and Hale, but they have to invent it. It's not something that it already exists for them.
Yes, Dr. Rickon Laszlo Hale, PhD, the author of The You Are, right?
Yeah.
Which
he has other books too, though.
Yes, of course. And there was a funny play on words for your finale, The We Are.
Yes,
which was great. And he's kind of a counterpoint to all this. Writing that book, will there ever be a chance that people could see it? I've heard conflicting reports that there might be a book put out at some point.
I think I myself have given conflicting reports on it, so I apologize for that. I want so badly to, and it will exist at some point.
Great,
but I have such a weird sense of ownership over it. I'm like a little horrified by the idea of anybody else writing it but me.
Well, it was cool like when they did that with Twin Peaks with the Agent Cooper tapes and, Laura's diary and stuff like that. And here you guys have released the Lexington letters
Yes.
as a free Apple book. Was that something that you wrote?
I wrote it with another of our writers from season 2, Megan Ritchie.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm supposed to, I think we're supposed to present an air of mystery, but it was in fact written by real non-fictional humans. But yeah, we worked on that together.
I mean, that's cool. I think it's a cool little book that, is great that it's offered for free. This is your trial by fire in a writer's room, and you'd never worked in TV. What could you tell us after the end of season 1 were your biggest lesson moments of working and running in a writer's room as you're doing it for your first time?
I mean, I've learned a lot. It's really interesting because I had gone to grad school and written a lot, and I knew what I liked on the page. Like I knew what worked on the page. I was pretty good at figuring out what was going to work in a reading, or something. But it's so different. And there was a big education about what's going to play on screen, and something that sometimes I didn't feel would work on the page, or I'd read it and I'd be like, eh. And it wasn't until it was coming out of the mouths of the actors and the language of the shot and the direction that I was like, oh, now I get it, of course. And so there was on one hand, these maybe seemingly conflicting lessons, but on one hand, I think I have learned to be a little more protective of the tone at times and step in when I think something's not quite there. But also you have to be open to, it's like what's in the writer's head might not be on the page, but it might be on the screen by the time it gets there.
Interesting.
And I've seen that happen in real, and the obvious example that I've said before is the music dance experience, which I tried like 5 times to cut in the. I was just like, I don't get it.
In the screen stage or in the editing stage?
In the screening stage. I'm sorry, in the writing stage, the script writing stage. Yeah. I was just like, okay, like so they dance, like so what? I wasn't sure about the tackle. I wasn't sure about Dylan tackling Milchick. I wasn't sure if he would do that in that moment. And it just wasn't until Tramell started dancing and the lights were going that it became clear. I was like, oh no, this is the best. This is maybe the best scene of the show.
I mean, self-doubt is a big part of writing, and you have to use your gut instinct as your editor. So what was telling you that the music dance experience would not work? Did you think it would be too light, too funny?
I think maybe, yeah. I don't know. It's not that I didn't think it would work. I thought we could lose it. I thought it was something where I'm like, if we're looking for stuff to cut, which honestly you often are just for production reasons. And I knew it was going to be a big thing. Like we had to get all those lights in there and everything. And we had to hire a choreographer. And I was just like, I feel like it's not like, I don't know what it's telling us about the characters that we don't already know. And it turns out a lot. It turns out there's a lot about Irving that you get just from the choices John was making in that moment. And certainly Tramell. And it just became one of the most informative and dynamic and interesting scenes, I think, in TV for a while. Yeah. So going into season 2, I at least have that experience to look back on and be like, okay, if there's something that I'm not quite seeing, like maybe still give it a chance, like maybe see what happens.
I've run a screening series here in Los Angeles since 2003, and it's where this podcast came from. And when the pandemic started, everything went online, of course, through Zooms, which I'm really glad that we have. But one of the things that was great about my screening series was there was this gal that would show up all the time, and it's Deechin. It's Deechin Lackman who, wound up playing Gemma on your show. She, like 10 years ago or so, she would come to every screening. She would always stay for the Q&As. She would ask intelligent questions to the writers or directors. And I love the subplot of Gemma. And I'm curious what you want to tell us about just for working it out, because there's a lot of great fan theories that you could look up, ranging from how self-aware she is she a clone or a zombie? What's on the testing floor that she comes from? But, you have her in this arc of episodes right at the end, and you really could have blown it in a lot of ways. I think if you gave away too much information, I know people will be mad at saying that, but for what you were doing on the show, it really made sense to keep this hazy, dreamlike atmosphere, because going back and rewatching it, it's even more heightened. So what were some of the rules that were important to you about how Gemma was going to interact with Mark?
Yeah, well, it's Gemma with the
Gemma, sorry,
soft G.
Yes,
but she,
my bad.
No, it's all right. But she was probably the hardest character to write, and we tried a lot of different things with her. And the writing and the crafting of her character continued well into after we had hired Deachin, because we knew that this character was going to turn out to be Mark's wife. And at one point it was like, well, maybe it's Helly, but that felt, it's like, nah, it's too obvious. Like someone will guess that. And so we wanted this character that we could really hide in plain sight, where she would make sense as just an interesting kind of strange part of, piece of the Lumen furniture. And she would be somebody where we're not looking for what's the twist with her, because she sort of feels self-contained on her own. And so we talked about, like, at one point, Gemma was going to be a traveling, like she was going to have a cart, and she was like a traveling vendor. Like she was going to come through with different office supplies, and you could she was sort of like an Old West peddler.
Right.
And she had a different name, and she was going to be like almost, sort of this weird prospector character. And we had a lot of fun with that character, but then that felt like a little too weird. And
because it was going back to old timey Egan days, I'm guessing for the of it. Okay.
Yeah. And so eventually, there was this idea that she's the wellness counselor. And that is something that we could just believe. It's like those wellness sessions are so weird that I think they work on their own without the twist. You're just like, okay. And you can't really tell if that character is severed or what her deal is at first anyway. But yeah, I mean, it had to be somebody who, where it was clear that sort of she was very strange and had been cut off in some way from her humanity, from who she really is.
The only nod that you gave through exposition is she does say in one of the wellness sessions, I've been aware, or I've been alive for 107 hours.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my notes. So the 107 hours was the one tipping hand of like, okay, something was different before that. We don't know what.
Yeah. And the idea with that is like, by that point, I think we've revealed that like she is severed and that she's a part-time employee. I think Cobell says that at one point. Right. She's like, she's a part-time employee. And so that's kind of our explanation for why she's maybe a little off is like, well, she's only been alive for these like few sessions. Like she comes in, she reads these things, and that's her whole life. Like that would mess anybody up.
Yeah.
But then when you realize who she is, it becomes a much bigger mystery. It's like, okay, well, that's just one piece of what's clearly a bigger puzzle with her character. I don't think this is giving anything away. At the time that we cast Deachin, we didn't know whether or not you were going to ever see Gemma, like the sort of version of Gemma that Mark was with, that he fell in love with. We didn't know at that point if you were ever going to see that character. So we wrote a scene for Deachin or an audition scene that required sort of a much more normal person that was in a normal sort of loving marriage, because we had to be sure that if the story did go that way ever, that we had somebody who could really convincingly play that.
Wait, somebody that could be an Audi? Wouldn't that be the easiest thing to audition for? Other than trans like wellness person, I think takes a lot more skill.
No, I think so. But after that first, we first auditioned Deachin with the wellness center scene. And then it was like, okay, well, now we know she can do that really well. But if we do ever show her, on the outside, we need to make sure that she plays well in that setting too. And she was awesome. So yeah.
Well, the finale is operating on all pistons firing. And it's just like the culmination of everything good about the show. Literally, Helly is walking around with spinning squares that are pictures of her, and it's her innie seeing these pictures of her, but it's in the Audi world. Tell us about when you realized that she was going to be an Egan, because this idea of her real vigilant wanting to, her hatred for the severed life to the point that she is trying to commit suicide. She is threatening to cut off her hand so that there's evidence in the outer world that something's wrong, down there if she cuts off her hand. It was really strong stuff that's articulated even more when she finds out that she is going from what everybody says in that episode, the granddaughter of Egan.
Yeah. I mean, I think it came about in the writer's room at some point. I don't think it was that was something I had planned from the very beginning, but it felt once that idea came up, it was just sort of too delicious not to pursue, because Helly is the ultimate muckraker. I mean, she's the ultimate, she's overturning the apple cart and she's blowing up everybody's conceptions of how they should act here. And, she's an iconoclastic person. And she believes that at least towards the beginning, it's like, I can at least trust myself, because that's her first thing is she's trying to write a note to her outie, because that's at least the one person that surely she can trust.
Right.
And so this idea that first that her outie would reject her and say, no, you're not a person, that's sort of the first big blow. Then it was just like, well, what's the ultimate nightmare for someone like Helly? It would be to find out that the devil is you, that it's not, Mark or Milchick or Cobell keeping you here. It was you. And not only that, but you're keeping everyone here. And it was just so fascinating to think about how that would affect her. And that's why at some point, I think I thought about maybe that twist comes at the end of the last episode. It's like, oh no, she's an Egan. But I ultimately wanted to do it at the beginning so that we could see her have to contend with that and just see the shock and horror on Britt's face, as she makes what's probably the worst discovery she possibly could have made.
I mean, the cross-cutting that was going on in the final 2 episodes, Dylan in the waffle party, he's on the bed wearing a mask. Again, you're dealing with duality. There's dancers in there. So we know that Lumen at least employs dancers, possibly sex workers. Mm-hmm. Even the things that were written on the whip that's sitting on the bed were crazy. But, as a testament, Dylan gets up and leaves the party early so that he could go do the overtime protocols so that they could all wake up. And you see them as their outies, which is just driving that whole final episode. But you're really getting to that tension of cross-cutting. And I'm curious how much refinement that took for you as writers to really have those moments where literally just lines of dialogue are leading into these other great moments based on Helly saying how excited she is to make the speech because we know she wants to tell the world now. How, Milchick is cutting through the belt, holding the door together. Dylan is losing his grips on all this. We're just not sure where it's going to end. And it really is that perfect ending. So what was it like to kind of write those cross-cutting moments and to really keep them as active as they were, even with Irving over banging on the door, screaming in front of the house?
Some of the cross-cutting was found in the edit or in, shooting it, but most of it was there. Most of it was in the script. Certainly that last lead up where you're going between all of them and they're all trying to get to their respective goal, that was on the page, pretty similar to what it was. But it was actually in a way, it was the easiest episode to write. I think I did the fewest rewrites of this episode. I think it's the shortest episode and it has the least amount of dialogue of any of them this season. But I think that was because it was just supposed to be visceral. It was supposed to be something that they each wake up and they find themselves in some version of a nightmare or a mystery. And we experience it with them. And in the case of Mark, we're a few steps ahead of him, so that's fun. But in the case of Irving and in the case of Helly, we're making these discoveries with them. So it was always supposed to feel like, okay, we've set up all the story, all the plot, and now we're just going to tip over the dominoes. We're going to let it all roll. And if we did our job right, it should feel like, you blink and the episode's over almost. It's like, oh my God, you're so in it every moment and nothing should feel contrived because it's all stuff that we've set up that now we can just play out.
And it's amazing because, you have the break room earlier, which is really trying to break a person. She's almost delivering an apology similar to the break room to the mirror right before she goes out, which makes sense. I mean, everything about the finale and those final moments are great, including Mrs. Coble again becoming a great antagonist, threatening to torture everyone down below. She comes out and says it. She's not talking about no perks. She's talking about torture. I just want to know what was, and I think by the way that it's great that not only did you write the pilot, but you also wrote the finale as part of the episodes that you wrote on your own. I know that you were involved in every episode, of course. I'm just curious, what was your toughest scene? That's the one to end on. What was the toughest scene during the first season, aside from the dance party, that you weren't sure how to crack? You weren't sure if you were breaking tone too far either way. You weren't sure if you were asking questions that could never be answered. What was your toughest scene? And how did you creatively rise to that challenge? So a scene that you kept coming back to over and over again.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm trying to think what the answer is, because there's a lot. I mean,
you can name a few. We'll take them.
Yeah, was definitely no shortage of it. I mean, going back to the pilot, like the dinner scene was actually pretty tough and took some tries to get right, because it's our first little foray into like, what is the greater conversation about Severance? Like, what is it? Is it secret, or is it something people know about? You know, and we had landed on this thing where it's sort of out in the world, but it's controversial. There's a similar moment in Eternal Sunshine, I think, where it's like you have people and they're sort of talking about this weird new process that you can get. But that was tricky. And also, you know, you're setting up all these characters, you're setting up Rickon and
right. That's
and
world building and rules, essentially.
Yeah. And Devin. So there was definitely a lot there. The plotting scenes were kind of tough, like where you've got like Mark and Helly and Irving and Dylan, and they're in the storage closet and they're trying to talk through, just because it's like, you want something that's going to start to get people's heart pounding and be like, okay, this is real. Like, we're off to the races, but also not suddenly just feel like an action movie that happens to star these characters. So that was one we had to go back to a lot. And Ben was really, you know, a perfectionist about it in a way that I think really was good, because it was like, you know, you tip it too far one way and you're suddenly in a totally different world. Yeah. Those are the first that come to mind, I think.
Well, Dan, look, you've been so generous with your time, and I can't wait like the rest of the world to see season 2 whenever it comes out. But really kudos to you on season 1, because it really is one of those shows that begs for a second season. But in case something catastrophic had happened, it still has an ending that's such a pop that even if another season didn't exist, it really is a near pitch perfect season 1, and just something quite enjoyable to watch and even rewatch. So kudos to you on that. Congrats on all of your Emmy nominations. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for your time. This was so fun. And I'm glad to be on here talking with you. And, you know, I will try to stay safe so that we do get a season 2. And I hope that people respond to it as much as they have this one, because it's really been a fun ride.
It will be fun to talk about it with you. Thanks again for your time, and best of luck at the Emmys.
Thanks, man.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to creator and co-writer Dan Erickson for being so generous with his time in chatting about season 1 of Severance, which has been nominated for 14 Emmys, including writing and, of course, outstanding drama. Best of luck to Dan and all the crew. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We just turned 10, folks. We lasted a decade, and we couldn't have done it without your support. And we just published our huge summer issue. It has Emmy contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Barry, Better Call Saul, Hacks, What We Do in the Shadows, and Station 11. We have actor Glenn Powell, who plays Hangman in Top Gun Maverick, talking about what it was like to be in that incredible film and his process. And, you know, he's also a screenwriter. There's scripts to read in Backstory. There's also an interview with director John Carpenter on the 40th anniversary of The Thing. There's so many great pieces in our summer issue, and we're continuing to add to it. So it would be fantastic to have you as a subscriber. And of course, to sweeten the deal, if you want to subscribe now, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory. You just enter that code into the shopping cart at backstory.net, and it will give you access to both the iPad app and the website. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. That's right. These are Zoom interviews. So you could watch us have these discussions on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have you consider supporting my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to find me on social media, you could always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. You could also find those same accounts on Instagram. So Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or Backstory_mag on Instagram. You could check out our Facebook fan page, or you could even send us an email at backstoryletters@gmail.com. That inbox gets a little cluttered sometimes, so I apologize if I don't respond immediately, but I love hearing what folks have to say, and I promise you, I will do my darndest to get to your message. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.